October 12, 1997. The lights of St. Mary's Hospital in Louisville, Kentucky, flickered against the cool autumn night. The air smelled faintly of rain and antiseptic, and the parking lot was nearly empty, except for a few tired nurses finishing their shifts. Anna Wallace, 28 years old, pushed through the glass doors, her scrubs wrinkled, her brown hair pulled into a loose bun. She carried her coffee cup and a small tote bag, the kind nurses used for everything: charts, snacks, dreams. Her sneakers made soft, exhausted sounds against the pavement. "Night, Anna," called a voice from behind. It was Marcy, the charge nurse. "Night, Marcy. Tell Dr. Lewis I said good luck with that new intern." Anna laughed, her tone warm but tired. "You get some sleep, girl." "You've been here 3 straight nights." "I will, I promise." It was a lie. Anna planned to stop for groceries, then drive home to her small apartment near Cherokee Park. She wanted to call her mother before bed. Evelyn Wallace worried too much, especially since Anna had started the night shifts. She reached her car, a faded blue Toyota Corolla parked beneath the far light pole. The bulb buzzed, flickering slightly, throwing quick shadows across the asphalt. Anna hesitated, setting her tote down to fish for her keys. The night was unusually quiet for Louisville. No cars passed on the road nearby. Just the hum of the streetlight and the distant sound of an ambulance siren somewhere downtown. Her pager buzzed, one last message from the hospital. "Thanks again for covering, Anna. You're a lifesaver." She smiled faintly. It wasn't just a job to her. Nursing was purpose. Helping people, even strangers, was what grounded her. A few co-workers still lingered near the side entrance, laughing about a broken vending machine. Anna lifted her hand in a quick wave. "See you Monday," she called. That was the last thing anyone ever heard her say. Minutes later, a janitor doing his final round passed through the lot. Anna's car was still there. The engine was cold. Her purse sat on the front seat. Her keys lay on the ground beside the driver's door. By morning, panic spread through the hospital like a fever. The head nurse contacted the police just after 6 a.m. Detective Raymond Keller was assigned by mid-afternoon. The story hit local radio within hours. Nurse disappears from Louisville Hospital parking lot. Neighbors described her as kind, hard-working, someone who wouldn't just run off. As the sun rose over the Ohio River, Evelyn and Robert Wallace began the drive from Lexington, their daughter's photo already printed on missing posters by volunteers. Something had gone terribly wrong in that parking lot, and yet no one had seen or heard a thing. Before we uncover what truly happened to Anna Wallace, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. This story takes turns that no one in Louisville could have imagined, turns that would keep a family searching for nearly 3 decades. By sunrise, Louisville was awake to headlines no one could believe: nurse missing after night shift. Radio stations repeated the story every hour, and by noon, local TV anchors stood outside St. Mary's Hospital. What had been a quiet fall morning now carried a current of fear. Inside the hospital, nurses whispered in corners, glancing toward the empty locker, with Anna Wallace's name still taped to it. Her scrubs from the previous week hung neatly on a hook, untouched. Detective Raymond Keller stepped into the hospital lobby, greeted by the smell of disinfectant and the uneasy hum of fluorescent lights. "We're looking for any detail," he told the administrator. Someone must have seen her after she clocked out. Security guards replayed the overnight tapes, though the footage was poor, static-filled black and white frames that showed movement, but no clear faces. At 11:42 p.m., Anna's figure appeared near her car. At 11:43, the frame glitched. When it returned, the lot was empty. Her Toyota Corolla remained parked, driver's door slightly ajar. Inside, her purse, pager, and ID badge. The keys were found beside the car, half buried in damp leaves. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no blood, only silence. Reporters crowded the police line, asking the same question. Could she have left on her own? Keller shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "Everything she cared about is right here." At noon, Evelyn and Robert Wallace arrived from Lexington, their faces pale from the drive. Evelyn clutched a framed photo of Anna in her nursing uniform, taken on graduation day. "She's my only daughter," she told a local reporter. "She wouldn't just disappear." By evening, the police organized a search around the Highlands neighborhood. Volunteers formed lines, combing through wooded trails and drainage ditches with flashlights and dogs. Helicopters scanned the Ohio River. Louisville hadn't seen this kind of community mobilization in years. Churches opened their doors for prayer vigils, and local diners passed out flyers. Bartenders, gas station clerks, and postal workers pinned Anna's photo near their registers. Missing. Anna Wallace, 28, last seen October 12, 1997. That night, Keller sat in his car reviewing the day's notes. He circled one detail, an unfamiliar truck spotted near the hospital exit around midnight. No plates were recorded. A nurse mentioned seeing headlights idling for several minutes, but no one had thought much of it then. Still, there were too many questions and no direction. As the second night fell, the Wallace family stayed in a small motel off Bardstown Road, refusing to leave until Anna was found. Evelyn barely touched her food. Robert sat by the window, watching the rain gather on the glass. "She's out there somewhere," Evelyn whispered. "I can feel it." Across town, Detective Keller stared at the caseboard, now filling his office wall, Anna's photo at the center, surrounded by names, maps, and timestamps. Louisville, a city known for its friendliness and faith, suddenly felt smaller, darker, and unsure of itself. Something had happened to Anna Wallace. And for the first time, the city of Louisville was afraid. Detective Raymond Keller had seen dozens of missing person cases in his 15 years on the force, but something about Anna Wallace's disappearance unsettled him. Maybe it was the way her co-workers spoke about her, with warmth, respect, and disbelief that she could simply vanish. Or maybe it was the eerie stillness of the parking lot where she was last seen. The first 48 hours were critical. Keller began with the basics, retracing Anna's final steps. He visited the nurses' station at St. Mary's, where coffee cups and half-written charts still marked the remnants of the night shift. "She left just after 11:30, said Marcy, the charge nurse. She was tired but cheerful, said she'd see us Monday. Keller wrote it down. "Did she mention meeting anyone, any unusual calls or visitors?" Marcy shook her head. "No. Anna kept to herself, but everyone liked her. She was kind. If something happened, she didn't bring it on herself." The words hung in the air, heavy with guilt and fear. Next, Keller turned to hospital staff who had worked maintenance and security that night. Among them was James Whitman, a quiet man in his early 30s with a short beard and oil-stained hands. "You were on shift that evening?" Keller asked. "Yeah," Whitman replied, leaning against a mop handle. "Left around midnight." "Didn't see anything strange." "You usually close the west exit around 11, right?" Keller pressed. "Sometimes later if I'm finishing up." Keller studied his face for a flicker of discomfort, but Whitman's expression stayed calm. Still, Keller noted the detail. The hospital's security system was outdated, 1990s technology that recorded over itself every few days. What remained of the footage was grainy and unreliable. On one tape, Anna's silhouette appeared for 3 seconds, walking toward her car, then static. Keller ordered a sweep of the parking area. Forensics marked tire impressions near the exit. "They're fresh," one tech said, "probably from the night she disappeared." The tread didn't match Anna's Corolla. That night, Keller returned to his office downtown. Maps of the hospital and surrounding streets covered his desk. He traced the route Anna would have taken home, only a 7-minute drive. No reports of accidents, no witnesses. She had vanished between 2 streetlights and a turn signal. At home, his wife asked gently, "Another case?" He nodded. "A nurse. Walked to her car and disappeared. Do you think she's alive?" "I don't know," he admitted quietly, "but her family's still waiting for her to walk through the door." Outside, Louisville's skyline glowed with the amber haze of late October. In neighborhoods near St. Mary's, porch lights burned longer that week. Parents told their daughters not to walk alone after dark. The city's warmth, its easy southern friendliness, had been replaced by unease. Keller leaned back in his chair, staring at the file marked Wallace, Anna M. He had no suspect, no motive, and no body. but he had a feeling. Something in that hospital lot wasn't random, and someone in Louisville knew more than they were saying. For the Wallace family, the days following Anna's disappearance blurred into one long stretch of exhaustion and disbelief. Evelyn Wallace hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a time. Her husband, Robert, tried to stay composed, but his silence was louder than any scream. Their small home in Lexington, once filled with laughter and the smell of Evelyn's Sunday cooking, now felt like a waiting room for bad news. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table surrounded by missing person flyers. Anna's smiling face, bright eyes, dimple on her left cheek, stared back from every one of them. She traced her daughter's photo with trembling fingers. "She looks so alive," she whispered. Robert folded another stack of flyers. "She is alive," he said firmly. "We just have to keep her picture out there." Every morning they drove to Louisville in their aging Buick, meeting volunteers at a local church who helped organize search parties. The pastor offered the fellowship hall for coordination. People from across the city, nurses, teachers, even college students, came to help. They distributed flyers at gas stations, grocery stores and along Bardstown Road, where the night traffic never seemed to stop. Reporters crowded the church steps. Cameras clicked as Evelyn spoke softly into microphones. "If anyone saw Anna that night, please call the police. We just want her home." Her voice trembled, but her determination never wavered. Detective Keller tried to manage expectations. "These things can take time," he said during a press briefing. "We're pursuing every lead." Evelyn didn't believe him. "Time?" she repeated. "My daughter's out there somewhere. She doesn't have time." At night, she and Robert returned to their motel room near the hospital. The neon sign outside blinked endlessly, blue and cold. Robert turned on the TV just to fill the silence, but every channel seemed to carry the same story: the vanishing nurse of Louisville. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, clutching Anna's sweater. It still smelled faintly of lavender detergent. "She called me that morning," Evelyn said quietly. "Said she was fine. I told her to rest more, to stop taking so many extra shifts." Robert looked at her. "You can't blame yourself." "I'm her mother," she replied. "If I can't blame myself, who can I blame?" Meanwhile, the Courier-Journal assigned a young reporter, Karen Dorsey, to cover the case. She was empathetic, careful not to sensationalize. After one interview, she lingered to help Evelyn organize phone numbers from tip lines. "Sometimes," Karen said, "these stories go cold. But sometimes someone sees something they didn't realize mattered." Evelyn nodded. "Then we just keep talking until they do." Weeks passed. The leads grew thin. Police chased rumors. An abandoned car in Jeffersonville, a sighting near I-64. But nothing connected. The world moved on, but the Wallace family remained frozen in that October night. On the 28th day, Evelyn lit a candle in the window of her home in Lexington. "Until she's home," she whispered. That single light would burn every night for years to come, a mother's silent promise against the darkness. By the time the first anniversary of Anna Wallace's disappearance arrived, the posters had faded under the Kentucky sun. The flyers that once covered telephone poles were now peeling at the edges, their colors bleached by weather and time. Louisville had returned to its usual rhythm, but for the Wallace family, the world had not moved at all. Detective Keller still kept Anna's file on his desk, though it had grown thick with dead ends. Every few months a new tip surfaced, a supposed sighting at a diner in Elizabethtown, a woman matching Anna's description seen boarding a bus to Nashville, but each lead dissolved under scrutiny. The police searched wooded areas, drained creeks, interviewed former patients from the hospital, and even brought in a psychic recommended by a desperate volunteer group. Nothing helped. Anna's name slipped from the front page of the Courier-Journal to a few short mentions buried in the back section. For Evelyn, hope became a ritual. She called the police every Friday morning, always with the same question: "Anything new this week?" Keller's voice would soften each time. "Not yet, Mrs. Wallace. But we're not closing it." In truth, the department had already moved resources elsewhere. New cases demanded attention: murders, robberies, missing children. Anna Wallace became a file in the inactive drawer. Keller hated that word. It sounded like defeat. At home, Evelyn began collecting every article, every flyer, every photograph, building a small shrine in her living room. The candle in the window still burned each night, but the neighbors had stopped asking questions. Some people whispered theories, that Anna had run away, that she'd started a new life. Others believed something darker, but didn't dare say it aloud. Mark Wallace, only 20 then, struggled under the weight of silence. He dropped out of college the following spring, unable to sit through lectures while his sister's face stared back from bulletin boards. "I can't pretend it's over," he told his parents. Robert tried to reason with him, but Mark's anger was raw. "Nobody's looking anymore. They've all given up." "Not everyone," Evelyn said softly. "We still are." By 2000, Louisville had grown, new hospitals had opened, and St. Mary's was no longer the same place it once was. Yet for the Wallaces, every road led back to that parking lot, that flickering light, that single moment when Anna disappeared from the world. In late autumn, Keller met with Evelyn for what would be their final official update. "We'll reopen it if new evidence comes in," he promised. Evelyn nodded, though her eyes betrayed exhaustion. "You said that last year," she murmured. When he left her house that evening, Keller sat in his car for several minutes, the cold air fogging his windshield. He looked at Anna's photo one last time before placing it back into the folder. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Years later, locals would still mention her name when the nights grew long and quiet. "The nurse who vanished," they'd say, half with sadness, half with superstition. In a city that prided itself on hospitality and faith, Anna Wallace became a story parents told their daughters, a warning and a mystery with no ending. In the years following Anna's disappearance, Mark Wallace became consumed by the case. He couldn't escape it, no matter how hard he tried. The photo of his sister still hung on the wall above his desk in his small apartment in downtown Louisville. Her bright smile, frozen in time, seemed to taunt him. She had been so full of life, so full of promise, and now she was gone. Mark had stopped attending college after the first year. The classes felt pointless, the textbooks dull in comparison to the desperate search for his sister. He couldn't sit through lectures about history, philosophy, or psychology when he couldn't even solve the riddle that haunted his own family. By 2003, Mark had become a fixture at the Louisville Police Department. He showed up every month, sometimes more, hoping for a breakthrough. He sat with Keller, speaking with the same intensity every time, asking for new leads, new investigations. "Anything at all. I just need to know what happened," he would say. Keller's answers had grown more routine with each meeting. "We're still waiting on the DNA results from the cigarette butts we collected in 1997. You know, the ones near her car." Mark nodded, his fists clenching. "I know, but it's been years, Ray. How long do we wait?" Keller avoided his gaze, as if ashamed of the time lost. "We're not giving up. We're not." But Mark had grown impatient. He couldn't understand why, after all this time, there had been no new evidence, no new information. He began to think that perhaps the police weren't doing enough, or worse, that they didn't care. His obsession led him to dig deeper, reading through old case files that Keller had handed over. He began tracking down anyone who had ever been connected to Anna's life, even distant acquaintances. He interviewed Anna's old co-workers at St. Mary's, hoping for any clue, no matter how small. One day, while visiting a local bar where Anna had once gone with her co-workers, Mark struck up a conversation with a bartender who had served her a few months before the disappearance. The man remembered Anna well. She was nice, always polite. I didn't see anything unusual about her that night. But Mark pressed further. Did she ever talk to anyone unusual? Did she mention anything strange? The bartender paused, his eyes narrowing. Well, now that you mention it, there was one guy, a guy who would come by sometimes. He was a bit off, always asking her questions about her shifts. Never tipped well. I never thought much of it at the time, but now... Mark's heart raced. Do you remember his name? Anything about him? The bartender shook his head. Sorry. I don't. He didn't come around much after Anna disappeared. Mark left the bar that night with more questions than answers, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the missing piece was out there, buried somewhere in the countless hours of investigation that had been spent on the case. Determined to find it, Mark spent his nights combing through old records, going through every detail again. He had become obsessed. The case was no longer just about finding his sister, it was about justice. He couldn't stop until he knew the truth. It had been nearly 2 decades since Anna Wallace's disappearance, and for the first time in years, the case was gaining traction again. Detective Sarah Delgado, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving cold cases, had recently transferred to the Louisville Police Department. She had built her career on cases that others had given up on. When her supervisor handed her Anna Wallace's file, she didn't hesitate. Delgado sat in her new office staring at the thick folder. It had gathered dust over the years, but to her it was more than just a closed case. It was an opportunity to give closure to a family still trapped in the past. The case had puzzled everyone. The initial investigation had turned up nothing solid. The leads had vanished one by one, as if someone had erased all traces of Anna. But there were always new methods, new technologies, new angles to explore. In her first meeting with Detective Keller, who had worked the case for years, Delgado asked, "What do you think happened?" Keller, now nearing retirement, leaned back in his chair. His face was weary, etched with years of chasing ghosts. "I think someone knows more than they've said. But whoever did it, they've covered their tracks well." Delgado studied the old evidence, photos, witness statements, and outdated surveillance footage. It was clear that the initial search had been thorough, but lacked the resources that might have made the difference. "We're going to reopen it," she said, "but this time we're going to do things differently." She had an advantage: time. With the advancements in DNA technology, Delgado knew there was a chance to find something that had been missed in the past. She requested the old evidence, tissue samples, bloodstains, and even the cigarette butts found near Anna's car, and sent it all to a forensic lab for reanalysis. As the months passed, the lab report finally came in. The DNA from the cigarette butts didn't match Anna's, but it did match a distant relative in the national database. Delgado's pulse quickened as she read through the report. The name of the match didn't immediately ring any bells, but there was a connection to James Whitman, a former maintenance worker at St. Mary's Hospital. Whitman had worked the night of Anna's disappearance. His name had come up once during the investigation, but there had been no substantial evidence to link him to the case. Now things were different. Delgado reached out to Mark Wallace, who had been working on the case himself for years, trying to find his sister. Mark had turned his anger into a relentless pursuit of answers, but even he hadn't known about the connection between Whitman and the DNA evidence. "What are you thinking?" Mark asked when Delgado called him to share the news. "We're going to have to talk to him," Delgado replied. "But I don't think he'll be easy to find." The investigation, which had seemed frozen in time for so many years, was finally starting to move. And with every new lead, the hope that Anna Wallace might be found and that her killer might finally face justice began to grow once again. It was early summer when Detective Sarah Delgado received the call that would alter everything. The lab had completed the reanalysis of the evidence collected during Anna Wallace's disappearance, specifically the cigarette butts found near Anna's car. Delgado had suspected the DNA might lead to something important, but even she wasn't prepared for what the forensic team found. The DNA did not match Anna's, but it matched someone else, someone who had been in the system for a while but not close enough to raise immediate concern. The result was a distant match to a relative of James Whitman, the former maintenance worker at St. Mary's Hospital. It was a single strand of genetic material, but it was enough to link Whitman to the scene. Delgado felt her pulse quicken as she stared at the lab report. Whitman's name had come up in interviews early in the investigation, but the lack of direct evidence had made him an easy person to dismiss. Now, everything was changing. "Do you think he's involved?" Mark Wallace asked when Delgado called him to share the news. His voice sounded like it was filled with a mix of hope and disbelief. For Mark, this was the closest he'd come in over 2 decades to getting real answers. "I do," Delgado said quietly, her mind already running through the next steps. "We need to talk to him. But first, I want to be sure." I'm going to gather everything we have and see if there's more we can find on his background. Delgado had learned to trust her instincts over the years, and right now, her gut told her Whitman had more to hide than he had ever let on. She wasn't ready to approach him just yet, not without everything lined up, but the evidence was undeniable. The cigarette butts had been discarded near Anna's car, and now they had DNA connecting Whitman to that spot. The next day, Delgado visited the hospital again. This time she was armed with a purpose. She wanted to learn everything she could about James Whitman, his time at St. Mary's, his behavior, any strange encounters he might have had with Anna. She spoke with people who had worked alongside him, including those who had witnessed him at odd hours of the night. Some remembered him as quiet and reserved, others described him as eccentric, but harmless. One of the former night shift nurses, who had worked alongside Anna, mentioned a conversation she'd overheard between Whitman and Anna one evening. They had both been leaving after late shifts, and Whitman had asked Anna about her plans after work. It was a typical small-talk conversation, nothing out of the ordinary, but in hindsight it had made her uncomfortable. The nurse couldn't quite explain why, but it was clear that Anna had been polite but distant, not her usual warm self. Delgado took note of every detail. She was beginning to see Whitman in a new light. He hadn't been just a background figure in the case. He was now a person of interest. The investigation was finally shifting. After all these years, they were on the verge of something real. But approaching Whitman would not be easy. He had been careful, and now with the evidence mounting, it was time to confront him. Delgado took a deep breath. "We're getting closer," she whispered to herself. The weight of the past 2 decades was pressing down on her, but in that moment, she knew they had a chance to find out what really happened to Anna Wallace. Detective Sarah Delgado sat in her car, parked across from an aging duplex in the outskirts of Louisville. It was late afternoon, the sun already dipping low in the sky, casting long shadows over the empty street. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for. James Whitman had been identified through DNA evidence, and now, after years of investigation, it was time to confront him. She had studied everything about him, his movements, his alibis, his work schedule at St. Mary's Hospital. There had been nothing out of the ordinary until now. Now the DNA evidence tied him to the scene of Anna Wallace's disappearance, and Delgado needed to know why. Why had he been in the parking lot that night? Why had he discarded cigarette butts near Anna's car? Delgado took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had faced difficult situations before, but this one felt personal. It wasn't just a case to her anymore. It had become something more, something deeply human. A mother had lost her daughter. A family had lived in limbo for nearly 27 years. She stepped out of the car and walked to the door of the duplex. Whitman's name had been on the mailbox, and she knew he was inside. As she knocked, she noticed the faint smell of cigarette smoke in the air. It was strange how one detail could feel so familiar yet unsettling. The door creaked open. Whitman stood there, a man now in his late 50s, wearing a faded flannel shirt and jeans. He looked the same, but his eyes betrayed a hint of unease as they met hers. "Detective Delgado, I assume," he said, his voice steady but guarded. "That's right, Mr. Whitman." "Can I come in?" Delgado asked, her tone measured. He hesitated for a moment before stepping aside to let her in. The interior of the duplex was modest, cluttered with old furniture and stacks of papers. Delgado could tell that Whitman had lived a quiet, solitary life, but she also knew that sometimes that was the kind of person who held the darkest secrets. "Have a seat," Whitman offered, gesturing to a chair near the window. "What's this about? I haven't heard from the police in years." Delgado took a seat, her gaze never leaving him. "We've been reopening some old cases, Mr. Whitman, including the disappearance of Anna Wallace." At the mention of Anna's name, Whitman's face twitched, but only for a split second. It was subtle, but Delgado didn't miss it. She watched him carefully. "You still remember her, don't you?" Delgado asked, her voice low but direct. Whitman cleared his throat, the tension in his shoulders apparent. "I remember her. She was a nurse, worked at St. Mary's, right? I didn't know her well, but I remember her." Delgado nodded. "You were there the night she disappeared, near her car." We've found evidence that ties you to the scene. Whitman's eyes flickered for a brief moment before he quickly looked away. His hands fidgeted with the edge of his shirt, and his voice grew defensive. I didn't have anything to do with that. I don't know what you're talking about. Delgado leaned forward, her tone firm but controlled. We found your DNA, Mr. Whitman, near her car. The cigarette butts you left behind. It's time to stop lying. What happened that night? The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Delgado's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her composure. This was the moment she had been waiting for. It was time to break through. The room was thick with tension as Sarah Delgado waited for James Whitman's response. His hands were clenched tightly around his shirt, his knuckles white from the strain. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the corner. I didn't do it, Whitman repeated, his voice shaking but firm. His gaze darted to the window, avoiding eye contact. He was trying to keep his cool, but his discomfort was evident. Delgado leaned forward slightly, her voice low but unwavering. You're lying, James. We found your DNA on those cigarette butts. We know you were there that night. It's time to tell the truth. He looked away, his breath hitching, as if he were trying to find the right words to say. For a long moment the room remained silent. Then he exhaled slowly, as if the weight of the past 2 decades had finally caught up with him. It wasn't supposed to go that far, he whispered, his voice breaking. It was supposed to be a simple conversation, a harmless question. I never meant for anything to happen, His words faltered and he swallowed hard, trying to push the lump in his throat away. Delgado didn't interrupt, her eyes locked on him, reading every shift in his expression. I was lonely, Whitman continued, his voice growing softer, almost regretful. Anna was kind to me, always polite. I'd see her around work, and we'd talk sometimes, but I wanted more. I started following her, watching her, trying to find a way to get close to her. I knew she wouldn't have given me the time of day if I'd just asked, so He trailed off again, the shame evident in the way he avoided her gaze. Delgado's voice was steady, but filled with quiet anger. So, you thought it was okay to stalk her? To make her feel uncomfortable for your own satisfaction? Whitman's head dropped, the weight of his guilt overwhelming him. I didn't know what I was doing. I just wanted her to notice me. But that night when I saw her leaving, I just wanted to talk to her. I didn't think it would go anywhere. I didn't think she'd be scared. Delgado's pulse quickened. She had heard enough. You cornered her, didn't you? Whitman nodded, barely able to look up. His hands trembled as he spoke. She asked me to leave her alone. But I didn't listen. I grabbed her, tried to stop her from walking away. She fought back and I panicked. I didn't know what to do, so His voice broke completely now, his body shaking as the full weight of his actions came crashing down on him. I didn't mean to hurt her. I didn't want to hurt her, but she wouldn't stop screaming. I pushed her. She hit her head on the pavement, and that was it. The confession hung in the air, thick with the gravity of his words. Delgado sat in stunned silence, her chest tight with the realization that the answer she had been searching for was now painfully clear. James Whitman had taken Anna Wallace's life, and now, after all these years, he was finally admitting it. Why didn't you tell anyone? Delgado asked quietly. Whitman's head drooped. I was afraid. I thought I'd lose everything, my job, my life. So I covered it up, buried it. I made it all go away in my mind, but I never stopped thinking about her. Delgado took a breath, steadying herself. You'll never get to forget her now. Whitman didn't respond. He didn't need to. The case had finally been solved, but the scars it left behind would never fade. The following days were a blur for everyone involved. After James Whitman's confession, there was no longer a question of if Anna Wallace had been murdered. It was now about bringing her home and giving her the justice she had been denied for so many years. Detective Delgado worked with forensic teams, organizing the recovery of Anna's remains. Whitman had told them she was buried near a construction site on the outskirts of the city, an area that had long since been developed into a parking lot. The land had been disturbed multiple times over the years, but Delgado knew that the excavation was their best chance to recover Anna and confirm what Whitman had admitted. The excavation team worked tirelessly, breaking through layers of concrete and dirt with precision. Mark Wallace, Anna's younger brother, had been notified and asked to meet with the police. He arrived at the site early one morning, his face pale and set with determination. He hadn't slept properly in weeks, his emotions a tangled mess of hope and fear. Mark stood off to the side, his eyes focused on the ground, as the team slowly began to uncover the truth beneath the rubble. He hadn't allowed himself to imagine what it might look like when they finally found her. But standing there, watching the dirt be moved piece by piece, his heart pounded in his chest. It took hours, but as the team reached the final layers, the faint outline of something buried beneath the earth began to take shape. Mark felt his breath catch in his throat. He was no longer sure if he wanted to see it, but he knew that they had come this far. Then they found it. The delicate silver chain that Anna had worn every day, the one her mother had given her before she started nursing school. It was unmistakable. "That's her," Mark whispered to himself, his voice breaking. "That's her." Delgado watched him closely, her heart aching for him. There was no easy way to witness this moment. She had seen families suffer before, but this was different. Mark had been so young when Anna disappeared. He had lived with the weight of uncertainty and loss for most of his adult life, and now the truth was finally in front of him, in a way that he could not deny. The excavation team carefully continued their work, and within minutes Anna's remains were gently uncovered. There was no rush to the process now. Everything had come to an end, but it was a different kind of end, one that would allow the Wallace family to finally grieve, to give Anna the burial she deserved. Mark stepped forward, his hand reaching for the small pendant that had once belonged to his sister. He closed his fingers around it, holding on to her memory, the tangible piece of the sister he had lost so long ago. "Thank you," he whispered to the team, his voice raw with emotion. "Thank you for bringing her home." Delgado nodded, her own eyes reflecting the weight of the moment. She had done her job, but it was never just about solving the case. It was about helping a family reclaim their past and, in some way, their peace. As they loaded Anna's remains into the coroner's vehicle, Mark turned to Delgado. "You're not just giving us answers, Detective. You're giving us our sister back." And with that, the long years of waiting and searching for Anna Wallace had finally come to an end. But the journey of healing, both for the Wallace family and for the city of Louisville, was only just beginning. With the remains of Anna Wallace finally returned to her family, a sense of closure began to spread throughout the Wallace household. But though her body was laid to rest, the weight of the years, 27 in total, still hung over everyone involved. Justice had been served, but the emotional scars were far from healed. In the days following the recovery, Mark Wallace struggled with what to do next. The truth had come out, but in many ways, it felt as though the finality of Anna's death had only intensified the loss. He spent hours with family, piecing together memories of his sister, laughter-filled days, stories of her determination, and the dreams she had shared with him before that fateful night. It was hard not to think about the years spent searching, the relentless drive that had kept him awake through countless nights of doubt. He thought of his mother, who had waited, prayed, and carried on without a single word from Anna. The pain of those years seemed almost too heavy to bear, yet in the midst of that weight there was a sense of relief. Anna had been found, and Whitman, her murderer, had confessed. Detective Sarah Delgado visited the Wallace family once again, though this time the conversation was different. Mark had become more than a victim's family member to her. He had become someone whose perseverance had, in a way, driven this case to its end. They had worked together through the darkest of times, and now they were beginning to understand what the light at the end of the tunnel truly meant. "How do you feel?" Delgado asked, her voice softer than usual as she sat across from Mark. Mark paused, his gaze distant as he looked at the photograph of Anna on the mantel. "I feel like I lost her twice," he said quietly, his voice breaking for a moment. "Once when she disappeared, and once more when I had to say goodbye for good." Delgado nodded. There was nothing to say to ease that kind of pain. "I know." The truth had finally come out, and James Whitman had been held accountable for his actions. He pled guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to life in prison. But for Mark, the conviction did not bring back his sister. It didn't erase the years of anguish or the unanswered questions that had followed him through his adult life. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive him," Mark said, shaking his head slowly. "But I don't need to. He'll pay for what he did, and that's enough." Delgado sat quietly, her eyes fixed on him. "You did what you could, Mark. You brought her home. That's all anyone can do." Mark sighed, looking down at his hands. "I wish I had more time with her. That's the part that hurts the most, the time I'll never get back." But as he spoke, Delgado knew there was more to the story than just loss. The Wallace family had lived through hell, but now they had the peace of knowing the truth. That peace, though bittersweet, was something that could never be taken away. As the days passed, Mark and his parents began to adjust to life without the weight of the unknown hanging over them. Anna's memory lived on in the small personal things, her favorite books, the little notes she left for them, the photos they had shared. And though the justice they had fought for had been achieved, it was the love they still carried for Anna that would remain undying and unbroken. Months passed since Anna Wallace's body was finally recovered and James Whitman was sentenced to prison. The city of Louisville slowly returned to its routine, but for the Wallace family, life had irrevocably changed. There were no more long nights of searching or unanswered questions, but that didn't mean the pain was gone. Mark Wallace had tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, but the weight of his sister's memory was ever present. He returned to college and resumed his studies, though the path ahead no longer seemed as important as it once did. His thoughts often drifted back to Anna, the girl he had grown up with, the one who had always been there until she wasn't. He found himself visiting her grave frequently, standing by the headstone, unable to shake the feeling that she was still out there somewhere, waiting for him to find her. It was a quiet place, surrounded by trees, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind providing a sense of peace. But the peace felt hollow. "I should have been there for you," Mark whispered to her one evening, standing alone in front of the grave. "I should have fought harder, I should have known." But as he stood there, the weight of guilt began to lift just a little. He realized that he had done everything he could. They all had. They had fought for the truth, and in the end they had found it. It wasn't easy, and it hadn't been quick, but they had found justice for Anna. Evelyn and Robert Wallace, too, had begun their own journey toward healing. It had been a slow process, painful at times, but with the support of each other and their community, they had started to move forward. Evelyn, in particular, took solace in the fact that Anna's name had been cleared, that she was no longer just a missing person, but a person who had been loved and whose life had been stolen. The Wallace family, in the aftermath, had found strength in each other. They had also found purpose. Mark, with the help of his parents, founded the Anna Wallace Foundation, dedicated to supporting families of missing persons and providing resources for victims of crime. The foundation became a place for others to find solace and support, a beacon of hope in a community that had once been shaken to its core. Through the foundation, Mark found a new purpose, one that honored Anna's memory. He became an advocate for victims' rights, speaking at local events and organizing fundraisers to keep the work going. Though the scars of the past would never fully heal, Mark found peace knowing that Anna's legacy would live on in a way that helped others. "I may never get over the loss," Mark admitted to a reporter one evening, "but I can make sure that Anna's name means something, that her life wasn't in vain, and if I can help even one person who's lost someone like we did, then maybe that's enough." In the years that followed, the Wallace family became a symbol of resilience. They weren't just the family of the missing nurse. They were a testament to the strength of the human spirit, to the unwavering belief that even in the darkest times, there is always hope, always a way to rebuild. And through the work they did in Anna's name, they slowly, but surely, began to heal. As the years passed, the name Anna Wallace became more than just a local tragedy. It became a part of the fabric of Louisville, woven into the city's collective memory. People who had once whispered about the missing nurse now told her story with a sense of reverence, understanding that Anna's disappearance had forever changed the city. The annual memorials in her honor became a tradition. Every October 12th, the day she had vanished, the streets near St. Mary's Hospital would fill with people, friends, family, and strangers, gathering to remember her. There were always candles lit in her memory, casting soft flickers of light against the cool fall air. Some still didn't understand how such a beautiful, kind woman could have been taken so violently. But everyone understood one thing: Anna had mattered. Mark Wallace, now in his early 30s, spoke at every memorial, though the pain was still there, buried deep. He had learned to live with the absence, but it was always there. He had learned to speak about Anna without breaking down, to tell the world what kind of person she was. Her kindness, her dedication to helping others, and the dreams she had been unable to fulfill. "It doesn't get easier," Mark would often say in his speeches, his voice steady but carrying the weight of experience. "But it does get more bearable, and as long as we remember her, as long as we keep telling her story, she'll never truly be gone." His words were a balm for the city, for the people who had shared in his loss. They understood now that it wasn't just the loss of one nurse, it was the loss of someone who had represented the best of their community, someone who had given her life to help others. The city, too, had begun to heal. Over the years, crime rates dropped, and local authorities took greater care to protect those who worked the night shifts. St. Mary's Hospital, once the site of Anna's disappearance, had implemented new security measures. The parking lot where she had last been seen was now monitored by cameras, and no one left after dark without being escorted. Delgado, who had moved on to other cases but never forgotten Anna, watched as the city transformed. She had spent years investigating Anna's disappearance, and she had often wondered if the justice they had sought would ever feel like enough. But now, seeing the community come together to honor Anna, Delgado knew that the healing wasn't just for the Wallace family, it was for all of them. The memorials weren't just about remembering the past, they were about ensuring that it never happened again. The legacy of Anna Wallace had sparked change. It had ignited conversations about safety, about the importance of looking out for one another, and about never letting anyone be forgotten. In the years following Anna's death, the city of Louisville had become a better place, safer, more compassionate, and more aware of the fragility of life. And at the center of it all was Anna, a woman who had been stolen too soon, but whose spirit lived on in the hearts of everyone who had heard her story. "Sometimes I feel like she's still out there," Mark said one year, watching the candles flicker in the autumn night, not in a ghostly way, but in the way we remember her. In the way we live differently because of her. And as long as the city remembered Anna, she would never be truly gone. It had been nearly 3 decades since Anna Wallace had disappeared. Yet, for the Wallace family, the pain felt as fresh as the day she went missing. Time had passed, yes, but the journey they had traveled through loss, uncertainty, and eventually the truth had changed them forever. Mark Wallace stood at the edge of the cemetery, staring out at the horizon. The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft orange glow over the quiet graveyard. It was the perfect kind of evening for reflection. The world around him felt peaceful, yet there was a tension in his chest, a weight that still lingered from the years of unanswered questions. "It's been a long time, Anna," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "I've waited so long for this, for you to come home." The gravestone in front of him was simple but meaningful. Anna Wallace. A daughter, a sister, a friend. The words were etched in stone, but for Mark, the memory of his sister was a living, breathing thing, constantly evolving, never fully fading. Evelyn and Robert Wallace stood nearby, their faces older now, but still marked by the pain of the years. Evelyn clutched a small bouquet of flowers, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. She had been the one who had kept the hope alive, who had never given up on the belief that one day Anna would return, even when it seemed impossible. Mark turned to them. "I'm sorry, Mom. Dad. I never meant to let the years go by without saying what I needed to." His voice cracked as he spoke, the emotions rising within him unbidden. Robert put a hand on his son's shoulder. "You did everything, Mark. We all did. Anna would be proud of what you've done." Mark nodded, wiping his eyes. I don't know if I'll ever feel like I've done enough. Evelyn stepped forward, laying the flowers at Anna's grave. She whispered, Anna, my sweet girl, we never stopped searching, and now we can rest. We can finally say goodbye. The weight of her words settled in the air between them, heavy but comforting. It wasn't a goodbye that would erase the past. It couldn't. But it was the kind of goodbye that allowed the Wallace family to move forward, to heal, and to find peace in the aftermath of years of anguish. For so long they had lived in the unknown, carrying the burden of Anna's absence, never fully understanding what had happened to her. But now, with the truth finally laid bare, they could look ahead. They could begin the slow process of rebuilding, of learning how to live again without the constant weight of uncertainty. Mark turned back toward the gravestone, his heart lighter than it had been in years. He wasn't sure if the pain would ever truly go away, but he knew that he had done everything he could for Anna. He had given her a voice, even after her silence had lasted so long, and for that he could find some measure of peace. We'll keep you with us, Anna, he whispered one final time. Always. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, and for a moment it felt as though Anna herself was there, with them, her spirit finally at rest, surrounded by the love of the family that had never stopped searching. The Wallace family stood together in silence, knowing that while their journey was ending, it was also the beginning of something new. They had finally closed the chapter on Anna's disappearance, but her legacy would live on, in every step they took forward.